A sunny stroll on Maple Street. The late afternoon sun, a comforting balm after a busy morning, warmed Maria Elena Rodriguez's shoulders as she ambled down Maple Street. The air, crisp and clean, carried the faint, sweet scent of honeysuckle from Mrs. Gable's overflowing porch planters. It was the kind of day that made the world feel right, perfectly balanced, a gentle counterpoint to the city's usual frenetic rhythm. Maria took a deep, appreciative breath, her lungs filling with the uncomplicated beauty of the moment. Her canvas market bag, slung comfortably over her forearm, held a generous bounty of crimson apples, their smooth skins still cool from the farmer's stall. She'd spent a delightful hour chatting with old Mr. Henderson about the surprisingly good yield this season, a small victory in the face of unpredictable weather. Each step was light, almost a bounce, as a simple, wordless melody bubbled up from within her, a tune she hadn't heard in years, but that now felt perfectly suited to the sun-drenched street. It was a cheerful hum, a quiet celebration of ripe fruit and warm sunshine, of the simple pleasure of a walk home. The street itself was a vibrant tapestry of domesticity. Children's laughter drifted from a sprinkler-soaked lawn 2 houses down. A tabby cat, sleek and unbothered, stretched languidly on a sun-baked windowsill, its eyes mere slits of contentment. The rhythmic clip-clop of a distant horse-drawn carriage, a quaint holdover from a bygone era, added to the almost pastoral charm. Maria's gaze drifted from the meticulously tended rose bushes in one yard to the slightly overgrown, but equally charming wild garden next door. She noticed the fresh coat of sky-blue paint on the trim of the old Victorian at the corner, a subtle change since her last pass, and smiled. Small details, easily overlooked, but to Maria, they were the brushstrokes of life, the quiet narratives of a community. Her mind, usually a hive of activity, plotting class schedules or mentally rehearsing Krav Maga drills, was blessedly clear. There were no urgent emails, no challenging student scenarios, no pressing decisions to make. Just the gentle sway of the apple-filled bag against her hip, the persistent hum on her lips, and the feeling of the sun's warmth seeping into her bones. She wasn't rushing, wasn't bracing, wasn't analyzing. She was simply being, utterly present in the peaceful unfolding of the afternoon. A deep sense of contentment settled over her, a quiet assurance that, in this particular moment, all was well with her world. The apples, she decided, would make a fantastic pie. Or perhaps just a crisp, refreshing snack. Either way, they were perfect. As she approached the bend in the road where Maple Street met Elm, a flicker of movement caught her eye. It was subtle, almost imperceptible against the backdrop of parked cars, but Maria's senses, finely honed by years of training, registered it instantly. 5 figures, clustered near a dark sedan, their gazes too fixed, too intense. The humming stopped. The sun still shone, but a faint, almost imperceptible chill began to creep up her spine. The dark van arrives. The afternoon sun, usually a comforting presence, felt suddenly oppressive. Maria Elena was humming a light melody, tending to the potted bougainvillea outside her small Krav Maga studio, the vibrant fuchsia blossoms a testament to her meticulous care. The gentle breeze, which usually carried the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's yard, now seemed to hold an unnatural stillness. A distant rumble, initially mistaken for a delivery truck, grew steadily louder, a discordant note in the otherwise tranquil street. Then, with a screech of tires that grated on the quiet air, a menacing dark blue van swerved abruptly to the curb, kicking up a plume of dust and dead leaves. It was a utilitarian vehicle, devoid of windows in the back, its paint job dull and scratched, like a bruised menace. Maria Elena's fingers, which had been delicately pruning a wayward stem, froze. A cold prickle traced its way down her spine. This wasn't a delivery. This wasn't a lost tourist. The side door of the van slid open with a jarring metallic clang. 5 figures, burly and shadowed against the bright afternoon, spilled out onto the pavement. They were big men, their shoulders broad, their movements deliberate and heavy. Each one wore a scowl that seemed permanently etched onto their features, a uniform of ill intent. Their eyes, though distant, held a predatory glint as they scanned the street, their gazes ultimately settling on Maria Elena. Rico Scar Morales, a man whose bluster usually preceded him like a herald, stepped forward, a wide, unsettling grin stretching his lips. It was a smile devoid of warmth, a baring of teeth that promised trouble. "Well, well, well," he drawled, his voice thick with false charm, "look what we have here. The little flower tender." His companions echoed his sentiment with low, guttural chuckles that scraped against Maria Elena's nerves. Maria Elena, despite the sudden chill that had gripped her, remained outwardly calm. Her hand, however, had subtly dropped from the bougainvillea to rest near her hip, a familiar, reassuring posture. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, met Rico's unflinchingly. The air around them crackled with an unspoken challenge, the idyllic afternoon irrevocably shattered by the dark van and its ominous occupants. Scar's demand. Rico Scar Morales, the eponymous jagged line bisecting his left eyebrow and disappearing into his hairline, pushed his chest out, taking a step forward. His faded denim jacket, too thin for the crisp autumn air, seemed to puff with his bravado. The other four men shifted, forming a loose semicircle behind him, their shadows stretching long and distorted in the afternoon sun. "All right, lady," he rasped, his voice gravelly, like stones tumbling down a dry creek bed. "Let's make this easy. Hand over the bag. And the purse." He gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist towards the worn leather satchel slung across Maria's body, and the smaller clutch she held in her hand. Maria's grip tightened instinctively on the strap of her satchel, the worn leather digging into her shoulder. A rapid staccato beat started in her chest, a frantic drum against her ribs. Her eyes, usually sparkling with an inherent cheerfulness, darted around, assessing her surroundings. The vibrant chatter of the marketplace, which had been so lively just moments before, now seemed miles away. The narrow cobblestone street, typically bustling with vendors and shoppers, was eerily deserted. It was as if an invisible curtain had fallen, isolating her with these five men. No sympathetic glances, no potential intervention. Just the chill wind whispering secrets through the alleyways. She noted the glint of a cheap, silver ring on Scar's index finger, catching the sunlight, and the way his eyes, though trying to project menace, flickered with an underlying uncertainty. He wasn't as confident as he wanted to appear. His bluster was a flimsy shield. "What do you want my things for?" Maria asked, her voice steady despite the internal tremor. She bought herself precious seconds, her mind racing, cataloguing each man, their positions, their potential weapons though none were overtly visible yet. Scar let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't play dumb, sweetheart. We want what's inside. And we'll take it, one way or another." His gaze dropped briefly to her hands, then to the satchel. He thought he had the upper hand, and in a way, he did. 5 against 1, in a deserted street. But Maria had faced worse odds in her training, in scenarios designed to push her beyond her limits. This was different, real, but the principles remained the same: observe, assess, act. The demand was clear. Now, she had to decide on her response. The first move. The air thickened, a palpable tension pressing down on the bustling street. Maria's initial irritation at the men's catcalls had morphed into a cold knot of apprehension. She kept her pace even, her gaze steady, but internally, her senses were on high alert. The scent of stale beer and cheap cologne, carried on a gust of wind, confirmed their proximity even before she heard the scuff of shoes behind her. "Hey, pretty lady, where's the rush?" A gruff voice slurred, closer than she expected. Before she could pivot, a meaty hand clamped down on her left forearm, its grip surprisingly strong, almost bruising. Rico Scar Morales, his face a ruddy mask of bravado and cheap triumph, leaned in, his breath hot and reeking of stale cigarettes. "Thought you could just walk away, did ya?" he sneered, his grip tightening, his eyes glinting with malicious amusement. Maria didn't flinch outwardly, but a jolt of adrenaline shot through her. Her mind, however, remained remarkably clear. It was as if a Krav Maga teacher, old Master Liang, was right there, whispering in her ear. Always be ready, Maria. The world doesn't care about fair fights. Survive. The words, a bedrock of her training, echoed with a sudden, urgent clarity. She remembered the drills, the repetitions, the muscle memory ingrained through years of disciplined practice. Scar's smile widened, a crooked, ugly thing, as he began to tug her backward, expecting compliance. But Maria wasn't a porcelain doll to be manhandled. Without a moment's hesitation, her right foot shot out, a swift, deliberate movement. Her heel, reinforced by the sturdy sole of her boot, landed squarely on Rico's instep. A sharp, pained yelp erupted from him, a sound utterly devoid of his earlier bluster. His grip on her arm immediately slackened, his fingers spasming in surprise and agony. He hopped backward, favoring his injured foot, his face contorted in a mix of shock and discomfort. The other men, who had been grinning in anticipation of their comrade's conquest, froze. Their mean-spirited smiles, etched moments before, melted away, replaced by open-mouthed astonishment. A flicker of uncertainty, then outright disbelief, crossed their faces as they stared at their limping friend and the woman who now stood perfectly still, her expression calm, her eyes sharp and unwavering. The bustling street noise seemed to fade into a distant hum, leaving a stark silence in their immediate vicinity. Maria had made her move, and the game had undeniably changed. Maria's lightning speed. Rico Scar Morales' face contorted, a deep furrow appearing between his bushy eyebrows. Feisty, aren't we? He sneered, his voice thick with a mixture of annoyance and a hint of something that might have been surprise. He took a heavy step forward, his shadow engulfing Maria. The air crackled with unspoken threats, the bustling street suddenly seeming to fade into a distant hum. Maria, however, remained rooted to the spot, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, usually sparkling with life, were now narrowed, observing every subtle shift in his posture, every twitch of his muscles. The cheerful demeanor she typically wore had vanished, replaced by a quiet intensity that was almost unnerving. Before she could respond, Scar lunged. It wasn't a refined attack, but a brute force attempt to overpower her, his beefy hand reaching for her shoulder with ill intent. His movements were predictably clumsy, fueled by overconfidence rather than skill. He clearly expected her to flinch, to cower, to be easily subdued. He expected wrong. Maria moved. It wasn't a conscious decision, more an instinct honed by countless hours of training. Her body reacted with a speed that defied the eye, a blur of motion that seemed to vanish and reappear in the space of a heartbeat. She dipped low, a fluid, almost balletic duck beneath his outstretched arm, the coarse fabric of his sleeve brushing against her hair. The momentum of his lunge carried Scar forward, leaving him momentarily off balance, his arm still extended into empty air. Maria didn't hesitate. As she straightened, she pivoted smoothly, her hand shooting out to grasp his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, firm and unyielding, applied with precise pressure to a vulnerable point. A sharp gasp escaped Scar's lips, quickly followed by a guttural cry of pain. The bluster drained from him in an instant, replaced by genuine shock. His eyes widened, his face paling as Maria twisted his wrist with controlled force. The sudden, agonizing pressure on his joint was unbearable. He buckled, his knees giving out from beneath him, and he dropped to one knee, a pathetic whimper escaping his throat. The heavy knife he'd been clutching, an extension of his bravado, clattered uselessly onto the pavement, a stark contrast to his now deflated presence. The dance of defense. The air crackled with a sudden shift. Rico, his face a mask of bluster, pointed a trembling finger. Get her. All of you. His two remaining companions, burly men with hardened knuckles, needed no further encouragement. They lunged, a crude, uncoordinated three-pronged attack. The first, a brute with a tattooed forearm, aimed a haymaker at Maria's head. The second, quicker but less powerful, charged low, intending to tackle her legs. The third, a lanky man with wary eyes, circled to her left, clearly looking for an opening. Maria didn't flinch. Her stance widened almost imperceptibly, a subtle shift that spoke of coiled power. The tattoo-armed man's fist whistled past her ear as she weaved, her head dipping just enough to evade the blow. Before he could recover, her elbow shot out, a piston of bone and muscle connecting with his ribs. A grunt of pain erupted from him, sharp and involuntary. Her momentum carried her into the path of the leg tackler. Without breaking stride, her knee snapped up, a precise strike to his solar plexus. He doubled over, gasping for air, the charge dissolving into a desperate struggle for breath. Maria flowed, a blur of controlled motion. She spun, using the momentum from the knee strike to bring her other elbow around, a vicious back elbow that caught the tattooed man squarely on the jaw as he tried to regain his footing. He reeled, stumbling backward with a dazed expression, his eyes clouding over. The lanky man, who had been circling, saw his companions falter. His wary eyes widened further, a flicker of genuine fear replacing the predatory glint. He had expected an easy mark, not a whirlwind of disciplined force. Maria, now facing him directly, moved with an unsettling grace. Her feet danced, light and swift, yet each movement was purposeful, generating immense power. She stepped in, feinted a jab, and as he instinctively covered his face, her hand shot out, not to strike, but to grab his wrist. With a swift, twisting motion, she leveraged his own weight against him, pulling him off balance. He yelped, a sound utterly devoid of toughness, as he fell backward, landing awkwardly on the hard pavement. Rico, who had been watching from a few paces back, his initial bravado completely evaporated, took a stumbling step backward. His face, usually a roadmap of scars and aggressive confidence, was now pale and slack-jawed. His men were down, dispatched with an efficiency that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Maria stood over the fallen lanky man, her breathing even, her eyes calm, but with an undeniable spark of unyielding resolve. The dance was over, and only one participant remained standing, poised and ready. The revelation. Rico Scar Morales remained awkwardly on one knee, the asphalt biting into his jeans. The air, thick with the scent of exhaust and the distant wail of a siren, felt suddenly charged. He looked up at Maria, his bravado utterly deflated, his eyes wide and unfocused. The bruise blossoming on his cheek pulsed with a dull ache, a stark reminder of his sudden, baffling defeat. The street, which moments ago had been his domain, now felt like a stage where he'd played the fool. Who are you?" he stammered, his voice a reedy whisper, stripped of all its former bluster. The question hung in the humid air, laced with a genuine bewilderment that replaced his usual sneer. He glanced around, as if expecting an explanation to materialize from the brick wall beside him, or perhaps from the small, unblinking eyes of a stray cat watching from a dumpster. Maria, though her breathing was still a little ragged, stood tall and unyielding. The adrenaline still hummed beneath her skin, a vibrant tremor, but her expression was one of calm resolve. Her dark hair, slightly disheveled from the brief, but intense struggle, framed a face that held a quiet strength. She straightened her top, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and then met Rico's gaze directly. Her eyes, usually sparkling with good humor, now held a glint of something sharper, something unyielding. A faint smile, not of mockery but of quiet assurance, touched her lips. "I'm Maria," she stated, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the residual tension of the encounter. The simplicity of her name, offered without fanfare, seemed to deflate Rico even further. He had expected a threat, a challenge, something that fit his narrow worldview. "Then," she added, the words landing with the quiet impact of a well-aimed punch, "and I teach Krav Maga." The revelation hung in the air, a sudden, unexpected shift in the narrative. Rico's jaw went slack. Krav Maga. The words echoed in his head, painting a vivid picture of the relentless, efficient movements that had just dismantled him. He stared at her, a new kind of fear dawning in his eyes, the fear of the unknown, the fear of an opponent far beyond his comprehension. The street, the sun, the very air seemed to hold its breath. Maria, the cheerful woman he'd dismissed as an easy target, had just revealed herself as something entirely different. The power dynamic, moments ago firmly in his grasp, had not merely shifted, it had been utterly, irrevocably inverted. A hasty retreat. The air, thick with the scent of exhaust fumes and Maria's barely contained fury, seemed to crackle. Rico's earlier bravado had evaporated, leaving behind a pale, sweating man whose eyes darted nervously between Maria's unwavering gaze and the glint of the sunlight on her knuckles. His two remaining goons, still sprawled on the pavement like discarded puppets, exchanged wide-eyed glances. The word, Krav Maga, hung in the air, an invisible weight, crushing their earlier confidence. They understood, instinctively, that this wasn't just some street fight, this was something entirely different, something they were woefully unprepared for. Rico, his face a mottled shade of red and white, slowly pushed himself up from his crouch. He rubbed the back of his neck, his movements stiff and uncertain. We made a mistake," he mumbled, the words barely audible, a stark contrast to his earlier booming voice. He didn't look at Maria as he spoke, instead fixating on a distant point beyond her shoulder, as if hoping to find an escape route in the sky. Maria watched him, her stance still poised, her breath even. She offered no challenge, no further threat, simply observed his unraveling. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant chirping of a bird and the frantic pounding of Rico's own heart. He finally turned to his men, his voice gaining a fraction of its former authority, though it was still laced with an unmistakable tremor. "All right, boys. Let's go. Get in the van. Now?" The two goons scrambled with uncharacteristic speed, their earlier swagger replaced by an almost comical urgency. One fumbled with the sliding door of the ancient, dented panel van, his hands shaking so much he nearly dropped it. The other practically dove into the passenger seat, his head ducked low. Rico, casting one last, terrified glance at Maria, practically threw himself behind the wheel. The engine coughed to life with a wheezing groan, a sound as decrepit as their aborted plan. With a screech of tires and a cloud of black smoke, the van lurched backward, then spun around, kicking up gravel from the shoulder of Maple Street. It accelerated rapidly, a battered brown blur vanishing down the road, leaving behind only the lingering smell of burnt rubber and the faint echo of their hasty retreat. Maria remained standing, a solitary figure on the sidewalk, watching until the van was entirely out of sight. The street was quiet once more, but the air still hummed with the memory of what had just transpired. Peace returns. Maria watched the black van's tail lights shrink to pinpricks, then vanish entirely around the distant bend of Maple Street. A faint scent of burnt rubber lingered in the air, a fleeting reminder of the chaos that had just erupted and then, just as swiftly, dissipated. The unusual silence that followed was almost jarring after the screech of tires and the shouted obscenities. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows of the elm trees, painting the pavement in hues of orange and deep purple. She knelt, her knees making a soft rustle against the fallen leaves, and began to collect her scattered apples. One, bruised slightly where it had hit the curb, another with a small dent from a stray pebble. She brushed them off meticulously, wiping away the dust and grit with the corner of her apron, a small smile playing on her lips. They were still perfectly good, just a little less perfect than before. Just like life, sometimes. As she rose, the familiar melody of her happy tune began to hum softly in her throat. It was a wordless, lilting tune, one her abuela used to sing while kneading dough. It filled the sudden quiet, weaving through the late afternoon air like a comforting balm. The rhythm of her footsteps, once brisk and determined, now held a lighter, more relaxed cadence. Maple Street truly was quiet now. The usual afternoon murmur of distant traffic, children's laughter, and barking dogs had returned, a gentle hum of normalcy. No lingering threats, no lurking shadows. Just the familiar, comforting sounds of her neighborhood settling into evening. The breeze, which had been still and heavy during the confrontation, now stirred the leaves in the trees, creating a soft, whispering sound. Maria adjusted the now full grocery bag in her arm, the apples nestled safely inside. Her gaze swept over the peaceful street, a profound sense of calm settling over her. She knew, with an unwavering certainty, that she was always ready. Ready for the unexpected, ready for whatever life, or Maple Street, might throw her way. The brief, intense skirmish had only served to reaffirm what she already knew deep in her bones. Peace had returned, but the quiet vigilance remained.